People love horror movies like they like horror books because you can go into the theater, you can sit in your seat, it's nice and comfortable, and then you can get the shit scared out of you. You can scream all you want, that's encouraged, and you can be afraid, you can cover your eyes, and when it's over, the curtains close, you poke your buddy in the arm, you have a laugh, you go to the coffee shop, and you can relive it again, and it's all safe.
Going to a horror movie involves a sensation that quite reasonably a lot of people don't enjoy, which is being scared. You know, a lot of people don't like being scared. Some of us do. I think for me, what I like is the idea of confronting something that in real life, I'd rather not deal with, you know. When I was a kid, the most horrible job you could be asked to do in this particular house that we lived in was to go downstairs and get ice cream out of the freezer in the basement after dinner, right? And the stairs, as there were a lot of basement stairs, were like open. And so every time I went down there, I would imagine something reaching out for me and pulling me in behind those stairs. And so for me, the horror movie allows me to vicariously peek behind those stairs without actually having to go down and get the ice cream.
Horror movies are classic escapism filmmaking, and people can just go see them and have this kind of roller coaster ride. It really is. You know, entertainment with a capital E. When I was very young, there wasn't any video. Pre-1980s, no video. So I would just go down to the local theater and look at the marquee posters, the horror posters, and think, wow, what kind of delights are inside.
The idea of going to a horror film as an entertainment is also a way to just escape the kind of mundane, right? You know, I have to take the streetcar every day to work. I have to, you know, have lunch at precisely noon every day. I've got a very structured kind of life. So when I go to a movie theater and I see things that are slightly out of control and slightly crazy, it kind of, you know, it's a catharsis for me. It shows me that there's other stuff out there. And I think it is sheer escapism, and it's escapism of a really fun, kind of interesting way, because, you know, while it is fun and it is scary, but I also do think that it feeds your, I don't want to say soul, because that is so cheesy, but it does fuel your psyche in some way.
The release people get when they're afraid and they scream, it's very similar to the release you get when you're happy and laughing. So it's good once in a while to just scream, ah! And you feel good after. So you go to the theater, you get your scare, you feel good after, and you go home and everyone's happy.
I enjoy horror because it's all about provoking. It's all about making a connection with people in terms of what they're familiar with, what they identify with, and then just going, now what are you going to do?
I think if Canadians don't know that we've made a lot of horror films here in Canada, that they just haven't been paying attention. You know, the first Canadian film to get distribution outside of Canada and into the U.S., picked up by a major distributor, was a horror film called The Mask. You know, you've got the Cronenberg films, which kind of established him as a really sort of important force. You've got Black Christmas, which kind of, you know, spawned a whole generation of kind of slasher films. And films like Prom Night and My Bloody Valentine are kind of like the dirty little secrets of Canadian film.
What defines Canadian horror, I think, is it's kind of like a brainy sensibility. Sort of the idea of looking at a horror movie, even if it's an exploitation, splatter movie, anything like that, as something other than or more than simply what's on the surface.
I think that we've made really good use of character in Canadian horror films, which is something that kind of separates us from the Americans. I think in American films, you have a lot of kind of generic characters. You've got, you know, the young bimbos who you know are going to die very early on in the film. If they have sex, they're going to die. If they don't, then they're going to live. You know, and you've got the big hunky guys who are invariably having sex with the young bimbos, and they're going to die too. You know, so we don't generally have that really stereotypical kind of stuff in our horror films. We have actual characters.
I think as Canadians, we walk around a lot with the fear that there's something inside of us that's going to erupt somehow.
It's so much about two layers of horror. It's not just about the gore and how many bodies are going to be around at the end of the day. In fact, it's often only about one particular corpse that you're either trying to avoid or escape, you know, and they're all up here, which to me is intrinsically a Canadian storytelling tradition. Our idea of what a good story is often involves some pretty horrific themes like identity and finding yourself and survival and bleak, hostile environments. You know, we kind of get it because we spend all winter here over and over again. So it's a state of discomfort is something I think Canadians are all quite familiar with.
A lot of people, even if they're fans of the horror genre, say there are Canadian horror movies. And the fact is that, yes, there are some of the greatest made, and some of that, you know, cut the way and led the way for the ones that followed were made in Canada. I did a book called Canadian Horror on Film and Television because I love the genre, and I think that there's a lot of great material there that people just aren't aware of. Tom Savini did his first makeup and special effects work on a Canadian film, Deranged. Oliver Stone's first feature was shot in Montreal called Seizure. You know, Black Christmas, made in Canada. Ginger Snaps, made in Canada, made in my hometown of Brampton, Ontario. And I'm thinking, oh, right, that is way cool. A lot of people didn't even know that. So I wanted to put a book together that paid homage and, you know, spread the word.
The legend states that in the wrong hands, this mask can do a great deal of harm. It can put the wearer in a hypnotic trance, make him do cruel and unnatural things.
The Mask is one of the most important Canadian horror films that was ever made, primarily because it was the very first. Made in 1961 by a director named Julian Rothman. This was the film that really broke through and eventually led really to a Canadian film culture. It was shot in 3D, which was kind of strange for the time because it was about, the 3D trend had died about 8 years before he tried to do this. It was also important because they were trying to create a film to do well in American markets and to be bought by a major distributor. The Mask is it's about a doctor who receives in the mail one day an ancient Indian ritual mask, and when he puts it on, he enters this strange kind of dream world. And as he keeps putting it on throughout the film, he gets more insane each time, and eventually he's driven to at least try to kill his secretary. But what was very interesting about the film is that the 3D sequences happened each time that he put the mask on. So each time the character would put the mask on screen, a voice would ominously say, "Put the mask on now, put the mask on now." And in the theater, the audience was expected at that point to pull their glasses over their face and enjoy the kind of trippy dream sequence that, you know, for 4 or 5 minutes. And I believe there's about 3 of those in the film, and they're increasingly very strange, but very, very fun.
It's ordering me to pick it up. Look at me. It's demanding I use it.
It must have been a great film to see up on the big screen. Generally, an exploitation movie is any movie that's kind of been ignored by the critics and oftentimes by the fans as well. I don't remember the name of Adam Egoyan's film from 10 years ago, but I certainly remember The Playgirl Killer. As Canadians, you know, that's part of our culture, and why should we ignore that just because it doesn't happen to fit into what we think of as art?
Everyone would poo-poo B movies and B horror movies, and believe me, there's lower levels than B. We call them Z grade or whatever. You know, it goes all the way down there. But you know what? You can't eat steak every night of the week. Sometimes you like to go to McDonald's and have a Big Mac and a big whopping order of fries with a shake. And you know, B horror movies and their lesser likes, they fill that role.
They're fun films to watch. Even the worst, absolute worst bottom feeder of a film, you know, I can usually get a few laughs out of, even if I'm laughing at how bad the film is.
I think that people love B movies just simply because they're bad. I know I'm certainly attracted to films that, you know, are kind of awful, but are sort of made by people that are enthusiastic, that really want to make films. And I think that's what Cannibal Girls kind of represents.
Cliff, what kind of a place is this?
Freaky.
You're not kidding.
Cannibal Girls was, it came sort of out of the same, you know, spirit of let's just do this thing that The Mask kind of originally did. Ivan Reitman and his buddy were sitting around and they decided, you know, let's make a movie tomorrow or next week or something. So let's make a movie on credit. Let's make a movie without having any of the resources. They sat down, thought of a tagline for their movie, which was "These Girls Eat Men." That was followed up with the idea that, okay, well, if that's the tagline, then it probably has to be called Cannibal Girls. Cannibal Girls starts off with two people stuck in it, like their car doesn't work in the middle of winter. How much more Canadian of a nightmare can you get than that?
Okay, try it now. Not the horn, the ignition, Gloria.
Huh?
Cannibal Girls is a pretty interesting film, starring Andrea Martin and Eugene Levy, looking rather like Gene Shalit, with a huge afro and mustache.
Just drove up with a bride. Want to spend the weekend, you know.
One of the interesting things about that film is that Ivan Reitman, of course, made it, who later did Ghostbusters and Stripes and so forth. And he had sold it to American International Pictures, who were the big drive-in studio at the time. And American International Pictures wasn't quite sure what to do with the film since they didn't think it was really that great. So they added a gimmick to it called which was an alarm, which rang during particularly scary scenes.
What do you want to do, Lisa?
Let's go to that rock concert in Bakersville.
Today's Friday the 13th, right?
Yeah.
Let's spend a night in a graveyard.
Graveyard?
Why not? Who knows who will meet there?
Drive-in movies didn't have to be good, and movies like the Corpse Eaters is probably a really good example of that. All you needed was a great title.
The Corpse Eaters is a movie that's a drive-in movie in a very unique way. It was actually financed by a drive-in and played only ever at one drive-in, the 69 in Sudbury. I don't know what the drive-in was called, but it was on Highway 69. Well, you put in the Corpse Eaters, and the first thing you see is this guy sitting in a theater seat, and a voice tells you that before any gory or gross scene, this guy will come on, a buzzer will sound, and he'll puke into his handkerchief to warn the audience, basically, that something disgusting is about to happen.
Here is what to look for.
The Corpse Eaters takes the success of Night of the Living Dead, which had come out about 6 years earlier and was very successful, and takes the zombies and the gut munching and everything, but like takes it to this place that George Romero hadn't at that point even thought of. The Corpse Eaters actually anticipates all the Italian sort of gut munching that was coming along about 6 or 7 years later.
There's quite a bit of Canadiana in the Corpse Eaters. I guess one scene would be when a character opens a can of Molson X and sprays it over his girlfriend's breasts. Kind of a classy Canadian moment that we should all be proud of.
You instantly know you're in Sudbury when you're watching the Corpse Eaters, because you got these hosers with Molson X driving around in their boat, listening to sort of third-string acid rock for about 15 minutes before they even get to the graveyard with the zombies. And then when they get to the graveyard, they pop the trunk and there's like a couple of rolled-up sleeping bags and a Coleman lantern, which, you know, every good Canadian hoser keeps there.
I didn't see anything at all out there.
Okay, stand by. Is this a take?
Rituals is interesting. It was, it didn't get very good critical notices, but at some point, I think Stephen King, famed author, came out and said, there's this little movie called Rituals. It's really scary. And a cult has developed around that.
Why does something become a cult hit? Because it's so bad it's good? Because there's something about it that's really unique and you can't get in mainstream movies?
A horror film becomes a cult horror film basically by being rediscovered. Generally, somebody will dig up an old film and say, boy, you know, we haven't, you know, nobody really talked about this film when it came out. Why not? You know, let's reevaluate it. So, you know, you have one person watching it and recommending that other people watch it, and soon, you know, a lot of people are rediscovering a film. It gets a DVD release with all kinds of special features, and suddenly it's a cult film. Rituals definitely deserves a cult status. Interest in this film has been really, you know, shooting up in the last 4 or 5 years. When it was first released, I think Ebert made it his Dog of the Week like 2 weeks in a row.
Look, Harry, somebody's playing a very sick game with us, and I want to know who, and I want to know why before...
There's a scene where some doctors who are hiking in the woods wake up and find that one of their friends has been killed and his head's been put on this pike. And it's creepy for a lot of reasons, but one of the creepiest is that, you know, they all might have been killed, but they weren't. And this guy just sort of put this gross head on a pike, and the reaction of the doctors is to get angry and throw the head down a cliff.
One of my pet favorite moments absolutely has to be when the characters are crossing the river on their little rope. I don't want to really give too much away as to what happens, but it's a very, very effective little moment.
I think Rituals is a movie that is ripe for rediscovery, because it has a maniac in it. It has a maniac chasing these doctors, but the ultimate horror actually comes from just being lost in the woods and their shoes go missing. They have to walk through the woods with no shoes, and I think there's something, I mean, it's very Canadian, the whole concept of being lost in the woods, even if you have never been lost in the woods.
I do think that Canadians kind of tend to look at the world differently. They look at the world as a kind of a threatening place. Now, I don't know if that's the tradition of ice and snow and weather and all that stuff, but I do think that has something to do with it. And I think the horror movie is in a way, is kind of a natural extension of this Canadian skepticism and fear about the way the world operates. I mean, one of the characteristics is that, you know, you don't see very many monster movies in the Canadian horror tradition.
You have to be rooted, in other words, have a sense of security in order for the monster, whatever it is, to come and attack that. We don't have that. So our monsters from the inn, to use that phrase, are sort of like driving us away from our roots, out of the house, out of places of comfort, and they drive us out of our bodies by invading our bodies and pushing our soul out, like in Cronenberg movies, or they drive us out into the cornfields or the wheat fields, and it's all best symbolized in Black Christmas, where the killer's in the house. Get out of the house.
The calls are coming from the house.
If you're looking at Canadian horror, the thing that's probably going to stand out is the usual man against nature, okay? Ginger Snaps, it's set in an urban setting, but man against nature, and you've got the werewolves coming in there.
Don't you just love the sound of nature?
There's a great film by William Fruit, Death Weekend, and it's that couple out in the wilderness, you know. Sure, it's man against man, but they're isolated too, and that whole theme of isolation runs through a lot of Canadian films. Rituals is another one, and we Canadians seem to do that wilderness thing very well. Even a film like Black Christmas, one of my favorite things about it is when they're doing a search of the park, it's outside and it's damn cold, and it's not in the studio. It's not studio cold and little snow soap suds on the floor, on the ground, to make it look like snow. They're out in the cold, and every time someone takes a breath, there's a big puff of, you know, steam and vapor coming out there, and you go, oh, it's so cold. And that's one of the things that you can see in a Canadian film that you don't see a lot of other places.
I think the things that really kind of typify Canadian horror are atmosphere, you know, and kind of an atmosphere of dread, more than you know, special effects, heavy blood spurting. We have a little bit of blood in our films, but if you look at something like Black Christmas, which is kind of a seminal Canadian horror film, there's very little blood in that film. There are some things in that movie that are really effective. I mean, the POV shot at the beginning of that film is really scary because you don't know what it is. The thing is, if you're actually into the movie, if you're actually letting yourself kind of go into that little weird world that Bob Clark has created there, the POV scene at the beginning of the film is like, I don't know, is it some kind of weird spirit? Is it a dog? I don't know what it is. Black Christmas is important to Canadian horror history because I think it's one of the most successful Canadian horror films of all time, even though it was directed by an American. But it is an example of a tax dodge film that actually was pretty good and made some money and was relatively successful both here in the U.S. But I think more importantly, it did kind of set the example or create a template for slasher films.
Who is that? Claude? Who is it?
Black Christmas is sort of the quintessential Canadian horror movie, but further than that, it's the quintessential slasher movie. You know, you see all of these movies made nowadays, and yes, they've got all of that stuff. You don't know who the killer is, the people are getting chopped up, you know, the promiscuous teens are the ones to go. And although there's not really that in Black Christmas, the teenager who's pregnant actually survives, so that goes against stereotypes of slasher films. But all of the elements that you would see in Halloween or Friday the 13th, and all of those films were set down in Black Christmas.
American films often take a very moral approach to things, where Canadian films do not. You know, the genre stereotype of the slutty girl always gets killed first. The guys who are smoking pot get killed first. That doesn't happen at all in Canadian films. Anyone can die. In Black Christmas, the strongest character is having an abortion. In an American film, she'd pretty much be the first. That's a very distinct kind of thing, and it makes the films a lot scarier because, you know, you aren't sitting there going, oh, she's gonna get it, or oh, he's next. Any character could be next, and that's really, you know, what a horror film should be. It should be creating that kind of suspense for you.
I'm going to kill you.
It really made a splash, and you know, it's really strange because so many people remember that movie, have very, very strong memories of that movie and how it affected them. The girl in the attic with the bag over her face, it was just this thing that just keeps coming back all the time, and it was just a very, very kind of traumatic image.
the moment where the kind of drunken sorority mother or whatever she is goes looking for the cat and sticks her head through precisely the wrong hole at the top of the stairs at the wrong moment.
Claude!
That was the one where I still remember collectively an audience going about 2 feet out of its seat.
For me, the scariest moment in Black Christmas is when Olivia Hussey creeps up. She looks into the room to see all her friends dead, and behind the door, through the crack in the door, there's suddenly this wide red eye looking out at her, and she just runs, and there's this figure behind her. It's a really terrifying, climactic kind of moment.
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
This buddy of mine and I, in school, we went to see the film together, and then for ages afterwards, we would try to scare each other by calling each other up and saying, "Hello, Agnes, this is Billy," and using that voice. And it's become kind of an in-joke between the two of us for the years. Anyway, but a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I was out having dinner with some friends, and this well-known Canadian actor named Nick Mancuso was with us. Nick and I are old friends. And the subject of Canadian horror movies came up. So we're talking about them all. Of course, Black Christmas comes up, and everyone at the table is like, "Oh, well, that's a classic. We loved it." And we're all talking about our favorite parts. And I bring up the voice on the phone, and I say, "Hello, Agnes, this is Billy. I love that voice." And Nick says, "It's Belloc." And I said, "No, it's Billy." And he said, "Oh, no, it's Belloc." I said, "Nick, I've seen this movie a lot of times, and I've been doing this voice. You know, it's Hello, Agnes, this is Billy." And he says, "No, it's Hello, Agnes, this is Belloc, because that's my voice."
How did you die?
Father, help.
That is definitely a classic movie. I mean, it's a brilliant movie. I remember, the thing I remember most about The Changeling, I think most people will tell you this, is the poster with the little kid on it, you know, the empty wheelchair with the shadow, with the little kid sitting on the wheelchair, you know, which is incredibly, incredibly creepy. It was just unbelievable. I mean, ghost movies actually are, I think they cross over in a way that other horror movies can't, because ghost movies are very tied into kind of like, you know, the whole thing about telling a ghost story by the fire.
Joseph, did you die in this house?
The thing that makes The Changeling a good horror film is that it's about ghosts. Now, most people will admit to saying, "You know what, I think I saw a ghost," or, you know, or have a ghost story that their grandmother used to tell them, like, you know, "Our house was haunted" and stuff. And you don't get looked at it like you're a complete freak if you say, I think that ghosts might possibly exist. But if you sat at a dinner table and said, "You know what, I think Jason Voorhees lives next door to me, and I saw him with an axe coming at me," people would think that you're a little...
What I remember most about The Changeling was thinking at that point in time that there was no ghost in that house that could possibly be more frightening than George C. Scott was, right? So I was saying, all he had to do was yell up those stairs, and I figured they'd all be gone.
What do you want from me?
I think the thing that's kind of sets David Cronenberg apart, there's a number of things. I mean, the idea of sort of the singular kind of vision that he has brought to the films, I think makes them unique. You know, the idea that the horror actually lives within each of us, you know, is not something that's completely unique to Cronenberg, but it's something certainly that he's explored, I think, more than any other filmmaker, certainly in Canada.
He had a vision, and it's consistent through all his films. You can see it. There's similarities between each one. He had, you know, things, I'll call them bugaboos for lack of a better term, but there are things that he wanted to explore in every one of them, and it comes out again and again. And, you know, after a while, it's a body of work, and people look at it and say, "Oh, this guy's different."
Why not breed a parasite that can do something useful? Are you following me?
Oh, no, I am.
They Came From Within is the American title for Shivers, which is the first David Cronenberg feature film. And it kind of tickles me to think of these American producers getting this film. They've bought it, you know, they've bought this film called Shivers. They watch it and they go, "Okay, we got to retitle this because it's not drive-in enough." And the title they came up with was They Came From Within, which is their, you know, it's what they think the movie's about, I guess, the things coming from within. They were probably thinking in literal terms, but if you just scratch a little bit deeper, you can see that it applies to an awful lot of Canadian movies. Everything comes from within, right? It's not space aliens. The horror comes from within something, usually from within us, people.
Shivers from frame one to the final frame is one big freak out for me. I had nightmares after I saw that the first time, and then I waited a long time before I could watch it again. And to me, that's the measure of an effective horror film, when it really grabs you deep down.
Cronenberg is unquestionably a masterful filmmaker, but he doesn't really start to earn a kind of a prestige reputation in Canada until he's moved away from horror films. It's from Dead Ringers on that Cronenberg begins to be accepted in Canada as the valuable contributor to our cultural life he has always been, ever since he made Shivers. But it's not until he moves out of that realm of gore and shocks that we're willing to say, yes, you're an artist.
Hobbes believed that man is an animal that thinks too much. So what he came up with to help our guts along was a parasite, a combination of aphrodisiac and venereal disease that will hopefully turn the world into one beautiful, mindless orgy.
There is a segment, I think, of the population that looks at horror films the way they look at pornography.
The middlebrow sensibility does not like horror movies. It has never really liked horror movies.
Generally, the reason I think that Canadian horror doesn't get a lot of respect is because it's being funded by taxpayers, and too often films have been held up and saying, you know, look what the government's doing with your money. And that's obviously the case with David Cronenberg's film Shivers.
Robert Fulford wrote this article basically saying that, you know, all your money, the Canadian taxpayers' money, is being channeled into this quasi-pornography.
I think the moment in where I really realized there was somebody here who was doing something really different, and it also was just kind of like so disturbing to me. It's a surgery scene where one of the surgeons, having unwittingly contracted the disease, which is turning people into blood-sucking maniacs, first kind of shows that he's lost his mind and developed a kind of a bloodlust. All I'll say is that it involves a scalpel.
I need something to cut with, Dr. Rushton.
Damn!
I was talking actually to David Cronenberg a couple of weeks ago about Rabid, and he said that part of making a horror film is trying to find an image which sort of sums up what the film is about. And if you can find that image, then you have yourself a very strong, you know, powerful film.
Is that Rose?
No, it's not Rose.
In Rabid, he said it was the image of the girl in the refrigerator who's dead, and they used in the poster.
That movie just struck me as just being kind of just nasty, a little nasty-spirited thing that was, you know, that has stayed with me. That just feeling of kind of ick has just kind of stayed with me for years after saying that.
He shot a lot of his films in daylight. He shot a lot of his films in really kind of like cold clinical institutions, like, you know, apartment buildings and hospitals and things like that. So his films had a very different look to them. But I think, you know, the idea was that he saw horror as being something that was viral, right? He didn't see it as people coming back from the dead. He didn't see it as a result of violating old Indian burial grounds, right, or anything like that. What he tended to see horror was as something viral. So it grew out of something that seemed to be created by humankind. Cronenberg's horror really, as weird as it was, always seemed to come out of familiar, recognizable, everyday situations.
He gets you where you live. He gets you in your head, and he gets you in your heart. He gets you with what it is you think is important, and then he starts to tear away at it.
And look! I sicken you.
The Brood, I think, is David Cronenberg's scariest horror movie, and it has a moment, or rather a whole scene where the little, gremlin people in their snowsuits are attacking an old lady in her kitchen. There's a single shot where she looks up, she comes into her kitchen, and she turns around and looks up, and the camera tilts up a bit, and you see this little snowsuit creature standing on top of the cupboards, and it leaps on her with this horrifying cry. I think that's probably the pants-crappingest moment of in Canadian film history.
Oh my God!
I think what you see in movies like Scanners and Videodrome is Cronenberg really kind of moving away from the literal kind of roots in horror, literally the kind of vile roots, into a more conceptual kind of horror, right? And really the sense of horror moves from, other parts of the body into the brain. By the time you get to Videodrome and Scanners, it really is about something going on inside your psyche. And the amazing thing about Videodrome, which I think is one of the most remarkable films, ever, that Canada has ever produced, is it's really a movie in which you simply can't trust what you're watching.
To me, that's what Cronenberg is the master at. He is the undisputed champion of just messing up your brain for good.
Go ahead, take a look.
Well, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong in there.
Well, you know what they say. Cold hands, warm heart.
A lot of critics, dismiss horror in general, and outright even. And that's because people usually judge a genre by its lowest common denominator. So when people think horror genre, oh, I know the horror genre. That's Freddy Krueger, and that's Jason, and that's Chucky, and that's, all of these stereotypical slashers, and blood and guts and things like that. And that's how they're judging it. It's like judging science fiction by Star Wars and Star Trek. That. Sure, it's a big part of it. And those monsters are a big part of it too, but that's not the whole genre.
Horror fans are very indiscriminate in their tastes. They're hugely indiscriminate. They will hate the idea of Michael Myers returning for the 5th time, but they'll go and watch it.
In Canada, we've had some sequels, Prom Night 1, 2, 3, and 4, but there's really nothing connecting the 2 to 3 to 4 except the title. I mean, Prom Night 4, the kids don't even go to a prom. They're in a limousine, and they drive past the prom, and they go to a house in the country for a weekend of fun. Couldn't they have at least gone to the prom? It's like ridiculous.
Canadian horror got pretty diluted in the 80s and 90s because it just got more, the video boom came out, and there were suddenly a lot more of these movies being made for a lot less money, and they were trying even harder to be American.
There's a few interesting Canadian slashers. Prom Night obviously is probably the crowd favorite, although not a personal favorite. it's generally the one that people think of when you talk about a Canadian horror film, and people do recognize that as a Canadian horror film. My personal favorite has to be My Bloody Valentine, shot in the Maritimes. A very, very Canadian film, right down to the scenery. Again, there's that kind of lack of morality you find in American films. Any character really could die in that film, and it kind of touches on some other Canadian aspects too. The joblessness, living life in a kind of a mining town or a blue-collar town. My Bloody Valentine is definitely a film that needs to have more people watch it, I think, and realize that it is Canadian when they are watching it.
Don't say I didn't warn you.
They also drink about a swimming pool full of Moosehead, and just as the movie goes on, Moosehead beer is always being drunk. There's big neon Moosehead beer signs. Whenever someone has to carry something around, they put it into a Moosehead beer box to carry it. So it's like the longest ad for Moosehead ever. My Bloody Valentine has a huge cult following, and all over the world, not just in Canada.
Roses are red, violets are blue. One is dead, and so are you?
In the 1980s, a lot more stuff went direct to video. You know, you had things like Rock and Roll Nightmare starring Thor, you know, that you could make really cheaply. And I think that the beauty of those early days of home entertainment, you know, this is long before DVDs, you know, and videos were unique, and people would rent anything. That's the kind of thing. You go to the video stores, and now, you know, we're used to having these big mega stores where there's a new release rack in the front, and then there's, you know, archival stuff, rows and rows and rows, where there's thousands of movies to choose from. It wasn't always like that. Home video, in a lot of ways, kind of replaced the drive-ins, you know, and so you had these just awful movies that would go directly to the video stores. But you know what? Kind of fun on a Friday night if you were sitting around with a pizza and a case of beer.
So you wish to battle with me again?
I am bound by this law to strike you from this place. It's my job.
It was the late 80s, the video market was brand new and booming, and what they really wanted was horror movies, sex movies, and action movies. Any of those three things, as long as the film was in focus, they'd buy it. So. There are rules of taste and morality and aesthetics that you just shouldn't break in order to make a mainstream movie. Well, you can break those in outlaw cinema. You can electrocute a naked girl in a bathtub in Psycho Girls, you know? I still shudder when I think that I did that, but you can do things because there's no studio system, there's no huge amounts of money saying just hold it within these particular bounds. The father of one of my partners was a retired film distributor. He was going down to Los Angeles on a vacation. So he said, if you give me a cassette of the movie, I'll see if I can sell it. 24 hours later, while we're still cutting, we get this phone call, and he says, I'm in the offices of Glenn and Globus, and they want to buy the film. How much do you want for it? So we did a really quick calculation. And we realized that if we paid everybody back, everybody, that would be $150,000. So I said, okay, how about two? And I heard yelling and screaming in the background and everything, and after a minute he comes back and he says, okay, they'll pay you two, but that's it, no residuals, buyout, go away, goodbye. And I said, that's fine. So we looked at each other and we thought, wow, the film business is easy. Of course, it never happened like that again.
So pretty, but they're going to have to come out.
To me, pulling out the toenails is more horrifying than, you know, taking a meat cleaver and hacking somebody up head to toe. What you've got is like a fantastically big and expensive special effect that'll make the audience go, wow, what a big special effect, that's cool. But my thinking is what really gets me? And what really gets me is if I were to see somebody, I don't know, in an elevator beside me and, you know, like picking off a half broken off scab, and they were just picking at it. I know what that feels like, and I would be shuddering. So to have somebody torturing somebody by pulling out their toenails, I mean, let's face it, when it's all over, you're still alive. But pain and the suffering, I think, by making it very small and focused, that's much more horrifying.
Give me my money.
Holy shit, this dude's alive. Fucking monster.
Well, that's when I came across the harsh reality of what the film business is all about. That film was produced by a couple of New York Wall Street types, I guess basically nice guys. And they came to Toronto and said, we want to get into the film business. We hear things are cheap in Canada. Can you point us to some hot young filmmaker? So this guy pointed at me and said, hook up with him, he'll make you a movie. So they saw Psycho Girls and they said, that's great, what do you got? And I said, I actually have a vampire film that I've written. And they read it, they liked it, and they gave me the money. We shot the film. It didn't turn out well because they decided to sneak the film back to New York and recut it. It was just a terrible experience. Now that I think of it, it was interesting to go from the first film that was such a perfect experience in so many levels to the second one, which was immediately the worst thing that can happen to a filmmaker, to have your baby actually just taken away from you.
The first thing that's going to distinguish a Canadian horror movie is it's going to be done on the cheap. So it's going to have a look to it. It's not going to be big and glossy and blockbuster type movie. It's going to be relatively inexpensive, and it's going to be innovative.
Don't believe everything you're told.
You're never going to get the innovation and the style and the look and the whole thing that comes together on a project when you have no money and you have to be creative and ingenious. That gives a flavor to a film that you're never going to recreate when you have, well, we'll just CGI it or we'll dub it in the studio. I mean, if you don't have those luxuries, you are forced to create something that's unique.
Stan, I'd like you to meet Pin.
Hello, Stan.
It's nice to meet you, Pin. I didn't know you liked chocolates until just now.
Thank you so much for the chocolates.
Pin is a very creepy little film, and is often mentioned by people to me when I talk to them about Canadian horror films. It's one that's really stuck in people's minds because of there's an anatomically correct doll who has a voice and or at least David Hewlett's character gives him a voice, and it's very, very creepy film, very memorable.
Get the sack, put the body in it, take it to the river.
Pin is a very special movie in that it doesn't seem to fall into any traditional horror kind of category. I mean, it's just a very unusual, it has a lot of unusual elements in it.
We don't have time to put the body in the river. What am I gonna do?
Hide him in the wood pile. Hide the body and come back and clean up the blood.
I don't know that many people know it, but certainly it's a special one here at Rue Morgue.
It'd be good for my heart to move out here. I've always loved this house.
I think what Canadians are really good at is kind of taking accepted ideas about horror and turning them on their heads a little bit.
Canadian filmmakers are a breed apart in terms of how they approach this horror and the horror genre. And so even if they're taking very traditional ideas like the werewolf idea, which is ginger snaps, they're doing it in an unusual way.
Whoa. Whoa? That's it? I can't have a hairy chest to be. That's fucked.
I did hesitate to write Ginger Snaps, mostly because my exposure to horror had sort of ended in the mid-'80s when horror was defined entirely by B-movies that you rent for slumber parties that involved a great deal of slashing, strangling, exploding guts and stuff like that. And that really wasn't my scene. As a writer, I was very concerned with character-driven drama and, you know, emotional reality and all this kind of stuff. And I never could understand a lot of the rules for American horror in particular, in terms of the girl is always the victim and is always running around screaming, half-dressed and often wet or blood-splattered in some... the whole world of it, as I understood it at that time, which granted was very limited understanding, but what I'd been exposed to really kind of turned me off. And so I was reluctant to write Ginger, mostly because I just wasn't convinced I was the right person to go to that world, you know.
It feels so good. No one ever thinks chicks do shit like this. Trust me, a girl can only be a slut, a bitch, tease, or the virgin next door.
So now, of course, I look at, especially after making one and seeing the incredibly varied and diverse audience that responded to it, have a whole new respect, of course, for the genre. I'd be a fool if I didn't, you know. So I adore it now, and I actually intend to work in it some more.
One of the things that Canadians are really good at is reinventing things and reinventing the horror myths that we've all grown up with. And they took the werewolf myth and mythology and turned it into something that was completely different, I think, than we've ever seen before. And particularly in the second one, Ginger Snaps 2, Unleashed, you know, the steps, the lengths to which Emily Perkins's character will go to not turn into a werewolf was really fascinating to watch and really interesting to see.
My best case scenario, Eleanor, is hair everywhere but my eyeballs. Elongation of my spine till my skin splits. Teats. And a growing tolerance, maybe even affection for the smell and taste of feces. Not just my own. And then excruciating death.
I think what Ginger Snaps, both of those films, suggested was, once again, it was a reminder like, oh yes, when we get into this genre, we look at it differently. We're capable of revitalizing it, and we're capable of kind of like working within the generic framework, but also kind of finding completely new ways of maneuvering within it. And the way that Ginger Snaps brought together werewolf mythology, but also the high school movie, and brought in a little bit of Carrie and a little bit of the revenge flick and a little bit of the, and also kind of dealt with our fear of sexually communicated diseases with a sense of humor.
My pen exploded, okay? My red pen.
You had unprotected sex and you infected him. Oops.
I mean, all of these things to me suggested that, you know, maybe this is something we should try to get back to.
We were very, very different with our treatment of young women in the film, and we were very different with our willingness, in fact, our eagerness to break the traditional storytelling rules about the myth of the werewolf. Our instinct to be insurrectionists with the genre was probably what makes it the most Canadian.
The day of reckoning. The day the curse grew stronger in the red and the black. Sisters united in blood, together forever.
For revelation, my lord.
But you're at the wrecking yard! On TV live!
I'm everywhere.
The independent horror film scene in Canada is very, very large, actually, and there are a lot of great movies, such as Graveyard Alive and Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter. I think it's great that these movies are being made. Some of these movies are very, very unapologetic. They're very, very extreme. Some movies are more fun and you know, they have definitely a lot of slapstick and a lot of humor to them.
Let's get on with the conversions.
Had enough?
We're running low on skin. I suggest we harvest another lesbian.
They are in the festival circuit for the most part, but they do get a lot of international acclaim.
I'm sure that right now, as we sit here talking about this, that someone in Victoria has a digital camera and they're probably working on a film that's going to be kind of cool, a horror film that's going to be kind of cool in their basement right now. Same thing's probably happening in Newfoundland, and it could be happening in Sudbury too.
What I like about horror films is that really they're social commentary, usually dressed up in a lot of blood and gore. You can get away with a lot more things in a horror film than you can in a mainstream drama.
Horror, because of its connection, direct connection with what's going on under the surface of our thoughts, connecting with dreams and connecting with nightmares, is one of the most revealing forms of popular culture.
The allure of horror is absolutely the ability to talk about what nobody wants to talk about. That is the job of horror. Horror's complete single occupation is to take all the muck away from whatever the current society is and show you bare the bones of what it is that everybody's afraid to confront. So it will change from decade to decade, and its form, its frame will change from century to century, but that's the beauty of it as well. It's also a historical document of the society that created it. It's a pure reflection, like a funhouse mirror, of what the preoccupations of the day are without pretending that they need to be prettied up.
The idea of dealing with taboo subjects and sort of subversive subjects in horror films is exactly why you're supposed to make horror films.
Cast into hell like a stinking whore. Don't forget to say your prayers, ladies.
These people are fucked.
The horror movie has been one of the very few commercial genres that's had some kind of a tradition in Canada. But the thing is, Canada has never been very proud of its commercial achievement. It's very strange, particularly in the realm of movies. They've never kind of celebrated that. So the horror movie has kind of existed as a sort of a slightly sublimated commercial success in the closet of Canadian culture, and nobody ever lets it out very often. So it seems to me that it's probably about time that the Canadian horror movie might be something that we are willing to look at as a really important, actually, aspect of the way Canadians look at themselves.